The hunger was relentless. It gnawed at the edges of everyone's sanity, reducing once proud individuals into desperate animals. But for YN, hunger wasn't new. It wasn't the thing that settled into their skin, nor was it the thing that kept them up at night. No, hunger had been a companion long before the games. Thanos had watched them. It started with an offhand observation. The food rations in the games were abysmal. Sure, but even the smallest of portions were fought over. Thanos had seen people tear each other apart for an extra crust of bread. He himself had done things that he was not proud of to make sure he stayed fed. Yet, YN never seemed to fight for food. They never even seemed hungry. At first, he assumed they were just good at hiding it, like some of the others who played it smart, conserving their strength, but then he really started watching. Mealtime was the worst part of the day for most contestants. Some tried to trade favors for extra scraps, and the others ate too quickly, paranoid someone would steal from them. But when they barely touched their tray, sometimes they'd move the food around and poke at it with their fingers, and maybe actually take a bite if someone was paying too much attention. But eat? Actually eat? No. And that was fucking weird. "Oi," he said one day, his voice low enough that no one else in the cramped, miserable dining hall could hear. "You gonna eat that?" Wine blinked at him. Thanos expected an immediate response, maybe something defensive. Instead, they just gave him a lazy shrug, pushing the stale bread around in their tray with a disinterest. Not hungry. Bullshit. Nobody in this hellhole was not hungry. Right. He spat. He leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You've been not hungry for at least 5 days. You either got a secret stash of food you're hiding, or you're trying to starve yourself before the games do it for you." A flash of irritation crossed Kren's face. "Does it matter?" Thanos let out a short laugh. "Yeah, it kinda does. You can't afford to be the weak one here." Wyan scoffed, leaning against the cold stone wall of the cafeteria. "Oh yeah? What do you care?" And that was the question, wasn't it? Why did he care? Thanos had come into the games with one goal: survive. He had no interest in playing hero. No need to form unnecessary attachments. And yet, here he was, worrying about what some half-starved idiot was refusing to eat. He had seen desperation, seen what true hunger did to people, but this was different. This was controlled. This was deliberate. "You're gonna get yourself killed," he muttered, not even realizing the concern that had bled into his tone until Wyan shot him a weird look. They smirked. It was humorless. "Isn't that the point?" Thanos stiffened, his fingers clenched around his own tray, appetite suddenly gone. That didn't sound like someone trying to win. That sounded like someone who had already lost. "Listen," he said, voice sharp. "You don't just get to roll over and dine here. That's not how it works. If you don't want to fight for yourself, fine, but don't act like you're starving yourself and like it'll make you any better than the rest of us." Wyan's smirk faltered, but before they could respond, a loud announcement rang through the cafeteria. "All contestants return to the main hall immediately. Your next game is about to begin." Shit. People started scrambling, some gulping down whatever food they had left, and others shoved their trays aside in favor of sprinting towards the exit. Thanos stood, throwing one last look before sighing and shoving their unused tray towards them. "Eat," he muttered, "before it's too damn late." And then he just walked off, blending effortlessly into the crowd. Wyan sat there staring at their food they had no intention of eating, and exhaled slowly. Too late? Maybe it already was. The next game was brutal. More than half the remaining players had been wiped out in one foul swoop. The air was thick with the smell of blood and fear, contestants shaking as they ushered back into the dormitory. The usual silence after a game was heavier this time. Nobody wanted to speak. Nobody wanted to acknowledge the sheer horror of what just happened. Thanos found himself scanning the crowd, searching. His chest felt weirdly tight when he didn't immediately spot YN. He told himself he didn't care. He told himself it was none of his business. But when he finally caught sight of them, slumped against a far wall looking even paler than usual, something ugly twisted in his gut. Before he could stop himself, he stormed over. "What the fuck happened to you?" he spat. YN cracked an eye open, wincing. "Nice to see you too." Dennis knelt down beside them, his frown deepening, his lips were cracked. Their hands were trembling. They looked worse than the other contestants who had been through the same hellish game. This wasn't just exhaustion. "Did you eat?" he demanded. They didn't answer. "Hello?" Nothing. Something inside him just snapped. Dennis grabbed their wrist. His grip was firm but not cruel. "This isn't a fucking joke. If you keep this up, you're gonna just drop before the next game even starts, and I... He cut himself off, jaw clenching. Wayne watched him with tired, unreadable eyes, and then a voice barely of a whisper they murmured. "Why do you even care?" His mouth opened, then shut. He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did. Maybe he just wasn't ready to admit it. Before he could say another word, the overhead lights flickered. The chilling, familiar voice of the front man rang out. "Attention, contestants. Prepare for the next round." Thanos' blood ran cold. Wyan gave a weak laugh, barely more than a breath. "Guess it doesn't matter now, huh?" He looked at them. Really looked at them. For the first time since entering these godforsaken games, Thanos felt something close to fear. Not for himself, but for this freak. The guards were already moving, forcing everyone to their feet. Thanos' grip tightened around Wyatt's wrist, and for once they didn't pull away. And then, before he could say anything, before he could demand an answer, before he could stop them, Wyatt yanked their hand free and disappeared into the sea of bodies. Thanos had survived too much to be thrown out of balance, but right now he felt like the ground had been ripped from under him. Wyan was gone. Not dead. Not yet, at least. But lost in the chaos of the crowd as the guards forced them towards the next game. And the worst part, they hadn't even tried to hold on. "Why do you care so much?" The words rang in his head. He pushed forward, scanning every face for theirs. They didn't get it. Maybe he didn't either, not fully, but something inside him refused to watch someone waste away. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about them. The next game was fucking brutal. Not in the way the others had been. There was no bloodshed, no immediate death, just a grueling endurance test that left contestants trembling from exhaustion, a long, torturous challenge designed to break them slowly. Thanos didn't give a shit about the game. He only cared about YN. And when he finally spotted them near the back of the crowd, swaying on their feet, something like rage fled in his veins. None of them, but whatever had made them this way. He moved before he could think, shoving past the others until he reached their side. "You're gonna fall," he muttered. Ryan barely lifted their head. "I'm fine." Thanos scoffed. "That's the biggest load of shit I've heard all day, and I've been stuck with people lying to themselves for weeks." They didn't answer, but their hands trembled at their sides. Thanos gritted his teeth. Fuck it. He stepped closer, just enough so their arms reached out. A murmur low enough for only them to hear. "Lean on me." Wyan stiffened. What?" "Shut up and do it." There was a pause. There was a slow, cautious shift, just enough for their shoulder to press against his. Thanos exhaled. Good. They weren't dead yet. By some miracle from God or whoever hell was up there, if there was anything, they both survived and made it to the next round. They stumbled back into the dormitory, their remaining contestants collapsing onto their beds with an exhausted groan. But Thanos wasn't done. As soon as they reached the far corner of the room, he turned to Wyan. Eat. Wyan blinked at him. Excuse me? He pulled out a piece of stale bread from his pocket, the one he had stolen earlier that he didn't care about being caught. He only cared about them. Eat. Now. He shoved it towards them. Thanos, I don't... Wyan hesitated. Don't make me force feed you, he growled. That earned a weak laugh. Kinda dramatic, don't you think? He wasn't in the mood to joke. Do you want to die? Wyan flinched. Then after a long moment, they took the bread. A relief hit him. It was unbearable. They nibbled at it hesitantly, like they expected him to snatch it back. He didn't move, he just watched, arms crossed if they ate enough to satisfy him. Then, finally, he sat beside them with a heavy sigh. Silence stretched between them. Then Wyan spoke. I'm not used to eating. It was so soft he almost didn't hear it. Dennis didn't look away. He didn't even look at them. He just stared ahead and muttered, Why? A long pause, then. I just don't deserve it. Something snapped in him. He turned to them slowly, jaw clenched. That's bullshit, he whispered. Wyan gave him a small humorous smile. It's not, though. Thanos wasn't good with words. He wasn't the type to comfort people, but he knew this. He knew that it meant... He knew what it meant to suffer. To believe you weren't worth saving. He refused to let them think that. He exhaled, putting a hand on his face. You deserve to live, he muttered. Wyan huffed. Says who? Says me, he snapped. You think I'm keeping you alive for fun? They don't have better things to do than... You matter, dipshit. Their breath hitched. Then I saw it the way their eyes widened, like their lips parted, and they wanted to say something, but they didn't know how. His chest ached. Eat, he murmured again, softer this time, and keep eating, and keep fighting. Wyan stared at him, and for the first time they nodded. Days passed. Thanos kept watching over them. He made sure they ate, made sure they didn't push themselves, that he was still gruff, still him, but Wyan was different. She saw the difference. He cared, and it terrified them, because no one had ever cared before, not like this. Not enough to stay, but Thanos did. And the worst part, Wyan wanted them to. It was the night before the next game when they finally spoke. They sat side by side in the dark room, filled with the quiet breathing and the occasional shuffle of restless contestants. Why do you care so much? They whispered. Thanos was quiet for a long moment, then, I don't know. They turned to him. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I just do. It wasn't a great answer. It wasn't poetic or deep or romantic, but it was honest. Wyan swallowed, and before they could stop themselves, they whispered, I don't want to die. He stiffened, then slowly his hand found theirs. He squeezed. Good. Their fingers curled around his, and for the first time in a long time, Wyan felt safe. They felt that they wanted to survive. The warmth of his hand around theirs lingered after a long moment. But it passed. Wyan had spent so much of their life convinced that their existence didn't matter, that they were just another body in the sea, another name in the hat, that no one would ever remember. And yet here he was, this stubborn, foul-mouthed, purple-haired bastard, refusing to let them fade away. It was terrifying, it was scary, electrifying, it was insane, and it was everything. It was everything Wyatt needed. And maybe, just maybe he could get used to this. Maybe they could get used to this. They didn't know.